Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. That's right, we're carrying on this series, and we are back with a third part today, looking at the third expansion, the Fossil expansion. Now, as a side note, the views for this are still not entirely where we might like. However, this has proven to be a very popular series among a lot of fans of the channel, so make sure you spam that like button. The views have been a bit lower than we'd like, but the likes have been ridiculous so far when it comes to this series. So you have my word that if you keep spamming that like button, which has been crazier than any other videos I've done, I'll keep making these. So Fossil then, it came out in Japan on June the 21st, 1997, and in English on October the 10th, 1999, according to the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia. And this is actually the smallest set that we ever had in the Pokemon trading card game. Now, just like we saw with the Jungle expansion, what they actually did was they took a small set. In this case, it was a set of just 46 cards, two smaller than Jungle, and they reprinted the 16 holo cards as non-holo rares. That is to say that even though there are 62 cards, 16 of them are just non-holo versions of holos in the set. Really, this is a 46 card set, which is absolutely tiny. It is the smallest expansion we've ever had. Now, it did have a pre-release promo. It was Aerodactyl, not a card that set the world on fire, but it was still kind of fun. And I've realised in these videos I've not been showing you the theme decks. That seems fairly sad. So let's have a quick look at the theme decks. Firstly, we had Bodyguard, where Coughing was weirdly the poster child of the deck. Little bit strange. Probably the best card in it, however, was the holo version of Muck. There was one holo Muck in there. And then we had Lockdown with Magmar on the front, but one holo Lapras inside being the real selling point, so to speak. And there were actually a couple of strategy guides released for Fossil. We got the Pokemon trading card game Fossil expansion Player's Guide, very snappily named, and the Team Rocket strategy guide were both actually published, I believe, by Wizards of the Coast, or at least the Team Rocket one was done by Wizards of the Coast. The other one was done by Gamesbooks.com or something. But it was kind of weird that we finally actually had cool little official players' guides. That was quite nice. Now, one of the things that was really cool about Fossil is that it finally completed the original 150 Pokemon. Now, it's very important to note that in Japan, they actually got Mew in their set, their jungle set. So they got the original 151. Mew was held back out of the Fossil set outside of Japan to be later released as a promo, although not very much later, to be fair. So Mew wasn't in there, but it did complete the original 150. And it also completed evolution lines. So for instance, we got a Gengar in Fossil. After having had a Ghastly and Haunter back in the base set, it took 2 expansions for us to finally get a Gengar. Similarly, we got a Dragonite in Jungle, after having had a Dratini and a Dragonair again, since the game started back in the base set. We don't see that, it happens occasionally, we don't see that very much anymore, but at the time, we did just have Pokemon that wouldn't get their full evolutions for a couple of sets. But we also did have a couple of Pokemon getting their second printings. So we saw things like Ghastly, which was a really good Ghastly, and Zapdos and Raichu, for instance, getting their second prints. Was not the first time this had happened. Back in Jungle, we did actually get a second Pikachu and a second Electrode. So they were the first ones that got their second cards. Pikachu makes perfect sense. Electrode? Were we crying out for a second one of those? Apparently we were. I'll go on then, I'll complete the list. The other Pokemon that got second prints in Fossil were Haunter, Magmar, and Magneton. suppose there was only really 3 more of those, so we can go for it. So, that's the kind of background of the set and all of the facts and such. We should probably take a look at what the best cards in the set actually were. So Ditto was a rather spectacular card. It was a 50 HP Pokemon, but it really fit the theme of Ditto in the games, whereby it just, when it was active and not affected by a special condition, turned into a copy of whatever your opponent's active Pokemon was. It was a really, really good counter for the promo movie Mewtwo. I did a video about that the other day, I'll pop a link in the description, but it was just an all-around pretty gosh darn good card. Muck came around in the set. It was the first Pokemon, not the last by a long shot, but it was the first Pokemon card we'd ever had that just turned off Pokemon powers, what we would now call abilities. It was the original ability lock. And yes, it saw play, and yes, it was really good. That Mew that I told you about was a really good card. It was actually another really good counter for Mewtwo. Wasn't in the set proper, but it does deserve a quick mention here. Weirdly, Psyduck was a really good card. You see, Psyduck had an attack for 1 Psychic Energy. Your opponent can't play trainer cards during his or her next turn. Now remember, at that point, trainer cards were everything. There was no items, supporters, stadiums, tools. Everything was a trainer card. And most decks played at least half of their deck as trainer cards, because we had the really impactful ones like Professor Oak and Computer Search, which would let you draw through your deck and find what you needed really quickly. So this was a great thing for buying your time. Now all it did was buy you a bit of time, you didn't do any damage, but if you use that time properly, Psyduck was a great early game Pokemon. Articuno was a very nice attacker in a Rain Dance deck with Blastoise. We had Blastoise back in the base set that let you just attach all your water energy, but it wasn't until Fossil came around with Articuno that we finally got the good partner. 3 energy, 30 damage and paralysis on a coin flip. 4 energy, 50 damage. If heads, 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench. If tails, 10 damage to each of your own bench. And I know that those numbers sound terribly low by today's standards, but I assure you back in 1997, or 1999 depending on where you were in the world, they were very good numbers indeed. We also saw that the Ghastly was really good. Now, as a side note, it was significantly better than the Ghastly that came around in the base set. But what was really weird here, I mean, I had 20 more HP. It went from 30 to 50, which is a gigantic swing. But what's really weird here is that this Ghastly actually saw quite a lot of play without Haunter or Gengar. And it's generally for the first attack. Flip a coin, if heads paralysis, 10 damage base. And we see a lot of those attacks in 2019. But the real difference is this was back when Pokemon did not have high HP. It was a nice attack for setting up. You could get back energy using energy conversion, but generally here, we are licking. And Magmar was actually really good here. Smokescreen, 10 damage. If the defending Pokemon tries to attack during your opponent's next turn, flip a coin. If tails, it does nothing. High HP. Chance to be immune on a coin flip. This was good back in the base to Fossil days. And Mr. Fuji came around as a rather nice trainer card. We did actually have a few trainers in Jungle, which is more than we can really say for Fossil. Choose a Pokemon on your bench, shuffle it, and any cards attached to it into your deck. It was really good for healing Pokemon, especially if you were using Chansey in an Alakazam deck, whereby you would move Alakazam to move all the damage off of your Pokemon onto Chansey, because it had huge HP. 120 HP on a basic is quite good nowadays. Back in the base set, it was ridiculous. But then Mr. Fuji would let you shuffle it into your deck, which essentially got rid of all the damage on it. It was a very, very good card indeed. Now, in terms of decks, I've talked about some decks in the previous video, but there are a few that we need to shout out as either having been made by the Fossil expansion or significantly improved by the Fossil expansion. So I mentioned Rain Dance earlier. It is worth pointing out here, it really was the best version of the deck. Blastoise became 1,000,000,000 times better when Articuno came along. One that we actually saw really nicely here was Psyduck played with Arcanine and Electrode. Now Arcanine actually came around in the base set and 80 damage was ridiculous. But it was for 4 energy, and even being able to use double colourless energy was far too expensive. Because your opponent at the time would just use stuff like energy removal every turn to make sure you never got the energy on there. So what you could do was set up behind a Psyduck, your opponent would not be able to play those energy removal cards, and you could finally take advantage of how much power Arcanine actually had. And it'd be played with Electrode as well, because Electrode was just good for energy. And any time during your turn, you may knock out Electrode and attach it to one of your Pokemon. If you do, choose a type of energy. Electrode is now an energy card that provides 2 energy of that type. So essentially, you could just attach it as a couple of energy to Arcanine, giving you again that little bit of extra speed, which was nice. Magmortar Electabuzz was a thing, and this was very much like the Haymaker decks from back in the base set, using stuff like energy removal to get rid of energy, and plus power to do extra damage, and gust of wind to get the right Pokemon off the bench, etc. It was just a different build of it. Electabuzz still did 10 damage and paralysis on a coin flip for a single energy, but then Magmar came in with that lovely smokescreen attack I told you about earlier, plus Smog, 2 energy, 20 damage plus poison on a coin flip. And remember, 1 damage counter between turns isn't a huge amount nowadays, but when everyone's playing with 70 HP Pokemon, that 1 damage counter means a whole lot more than when we're all playing with 200 to 300 HP Pokemon. And it was nice because at the time, of course, Mewtwo was a known quantity, so people could play stuff that resisted it or hit it for weakness. And Hitmonchan was a known quantity, so people could play stuff that resisted it or hit it for weakness. Nothing resisted Magmar, and there was no obvious water Pokemon to play to counter it, unless you're playing something like Articuno or Lapras in a Rain Dance deck. It is worth pointing out, actually, while we're here, Lapras was another fairly good option in a Rain Dance deck, but probably not quite as good as Articuno. And decks built around the movie promo Mewtwo were absolutely crushing, but I did a separate video about that. I'll link it in the description. Plus, it may have come around about the same time as Fossil, just before in Japan, just after over here, but it remains that it was not actually a part of the Fossil expansion, so it doesn't really count. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It might have been the smallest set ever, but it had a number of very impactful cards that really did change the metagame. It had a big impact on the competitive landscape, even though the card that had maybe the biggest impact was the Mewtwo that wasn't actually in the set. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. As I've said, make sure you keep spamming that like button as you have done for the other 2 videos. As long as you keep showing your love for this series, I'll keep making it. There we go. But I want to know your memories now. I want to know what you think of Fossil. I want to know what cards you liked, what you were playing at the time. And if you didn't play at the time, back in hindsight, what looked fun. Let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And do please make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WasiPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are still awesome. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.